So the way that we've structured this today is we're going to go through why some people find difficult conversations more difficult than others, and how some tips and tricks in navigating them. And then we're just going to, I've just got a whole series of questions to ask Dee around the HR, IR, tricky questions that come up with it. But I just wanted to start, and I know I harp on, we have for our ongoing packages, people on our ongoing we do our webinars on a monthly basis, and I know we talk about social styles all the time, so do we have to talk about that again? Such a foundational piece when it comes to leadership. So there's different styles, different personality styles. We all probably have a bit of a mixture, but we do tend to have stronger characteristics in one style.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important that if people aren't aware of their natural behavioural presets, especially under stress, how they process information and how they deliver information, then they're usually going to go into conversations and they get a reaction that they're not expecting. And it's purely because of either the way that person has delivered the information and not taken into consideration who is receiving it on the other end. If you and I were to have a very difficult conversation, it would be very animated, it would be very robust, but then we'd probably walk out of it at the end and go, oh, should we go and have a beer?
Yeah, it can be quite direct because we're both direct.
It can be really explosive, very short, sharp, and we both use language that has the capacity to cut the other off at the knees. But that's how we communicate, that's our preset, that's our natural tendency. But if we were to do that to a non-direct person, we'd probably have
stress,
fears and all of those sorts of things, and go, why? It's just a conversation.
And it's also to think about the person receiving the information and their style with it. So I just wanted to go through a couple, like obviously that driving personality or direct personality. What is it in the disc? It's the high D personality, the dominant personality. So these people, potentially you're not on this call because you actually feel quite comfortable having difficult conversations.
Probably the worst ones at it, to be honest.
I think that direct people, they just cut to the chase. They just call it as it is. They feel very confident and being able to articulate what their concerns are.
Don't have a lot of patience, don't have a lot of tolerance, and don't have a lot of forethought on how it impacts person over project.
So the positive side of this is they deal with things pretty quickly as they come up, and they'll be quite direct about it. The other positive things about this personality style is that you don't hold on to resentment. Once you've said it, you've moved on. You're not holding on, overthinking it.
Yeah.
But you can be fairly blunt and to the point, which can be seen as being aggressive, controlling, overbearing, and potentially that's where you come into that sort of bullying side when you've got
intimidating.
Because you just let it rip. Then we have on the other side, we've got more of the amiable. So your amiable people are your people, and they don't like conflict. So or change, So potentially people who are on this call, there'll be a few amiables, I would suspect, on it, because it's really part of your job that you don't enjoy. You're the nice people, I like to say. You're the team players.
They're the rocks of the organisation. They never forget the birthdays.
They're
very consistent, very reliable.
And they just want everybody to be happy, and they've got naturally built-in good manners, do the right thing. They often find it quite shocking that people behave in a way that they don't see as appropriate in the workplace.
And they will prioritise people over projects. So if there's a difficult conversation to be had and the person is crying and very emotive in front of them, they will forget the fact that there's a difficult conversation that needs to happen and gravitate towards the let's make the person okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Put your head in the sand, delay having the difficult conversation, overthinking the conversation. Interestingly, what I do find with amiable people is you delay, you don't like to bring up the issue and talk about it, have the conflict, so you let it go, and then it's like a bubble that's become too much, and you can become a little bit explosive and quite emotive when you do deal with it. And that's quite a common thing that will happen in an amiable scenario. Analytical people, when you're coming to a difficult conversation,
they will be forearmed with all of the backs. Not interested,
which is often a good thing.
Absolutely, can be overshadowed by the fact that you have a human being in front of you, essentially, and the thoughts and feelings don't really factor into it. So it's usually very factual, very bit like the drivers and the dominant personality profiles. They can be quite stuffy and appear not to care.
They'll have a script sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
They'll want to really plan out how it's going to go, what they're going to say. They'll want to know how the whole thing will run, which is difficult because we don't always know how people are going to react when we go into these conversations. But they'll be very factual. And then you've got obviously your expressive one and
the DISC profile system.
Yeah, they are far more creative and flamboyant, and
they're all about relationships. They're people.
Suffer foot and mouth disease, so they don't always put the preparation in for the meeting, I would say. They just want to go.
They're more likely to say, look, let's just go and have a coffee.
Yeah. And then talk,
and
not listen.
Skirt around the issue and then go, it's all good, we're fine.
Yeah, this is about the relationship. Yeah, so they talk, they don't listen, don't necessarily prepare. And so pros and cons for all of those. But I think it is really important that you do have a think about what is your style and what the positive aspects are of that, because all of those styles, there are a positive aspect, but also what may hinder you. The other thing, just really quickly, is think about.
Can I add in?
Yeah.
If you've never done any of those social styles or DISC, or there's a couple of other, they're all modelled off the same sort of situation. Give us a call and we can help you do that. There's lots of obviously online resources as well. But the main point is that if you don't have an understanding of your style, you cannot adapt to suit the person in front of you, because as a leader or as a person that's having that difficult conversation, it's your responsibility to adapt to the person who's receiving your message, because at the end of the day you want a win-win outcome. So you want to be able to execute the conversation, but you also want either the relationship to be preserved or things to progress naturally and have the person move on or whatever it might be. But if you want to achieve a win-win outcome, you've got to take ownership of modifying the delivery to suit the person in front of you, not the other way around.
Yeah, because otherwise typically what we do is we give information the way we would like it to receive it. But if I'm a driving personality, I would like someone to give me very direct feedback, because that works to me. I want you to be to the point, direct. I want to be able to have a robust conversation with you about it. I want to deal with it and I want us to move on. That would work really well if you're having a performance management meeting with me.
Yeah, and look, I'm very similar. I don't come to me with something that happened 3 months ago, because I will throw it back in the face. And I think that's really important when considering the person that's sitting opposite you, how they're going to react to that conversation. Like you and I are very similar, so we can see it playing out, and we have a fair degree of experience in working with different behavioural precepts and personality types. But if you were sitting with a steady or an amiable type person, that conversation is going to go down in a blaze of thought.
Yeah, they're going to be completely confronted by that sort of accusation, and they're going to feel on the back foot straight away.
Or potentially they're just not going to say anything because they don't like the conflict, and then you're going to go home and a day later you get a 3-page email on all of the regurgitation of what they have
they wish they'd said.
And what they've thought about.
And they've overthought it. And personality, you're really wanting to build that relationship. It's the positive, negative, positive sandwich. It's about making sure that they do feel that they're trusted and that they're respected, not being too confronting to them. And that otherwise you're looking at an exit strategy, right?
Absolutely.
So you need to really work on building that trust with those people.
And I think the main thing that we tend to overlook as people who have to have difficult conversations day in and day out is we've had prep time. We know what the issue is. We've had time to mentally prepare for it and potentially expect the conversation.
How to.
Absolutely. The person sitting in front of you actually having this difficult conversation is not at the same journey, not the same step that you are, because you've already had time to digest and come to terms with what needs to happen. They're potentially hearing it for the first time, and quite often we don't allow room in the conversation for that. The other thing with the amiables is they'll take it personally. Where you're expressive. And they'll take it personally. Whereas if you tell me that my email probably is, and I would just see that as quite a transactional thing. Whereas if I was an amiable or an expressive, I would see that as a personal criticism. I'm a bad person because my grandma's bad. So it's just the way that we would frame it. An analytical person, you're going to have to tell them what the meeting's about. Give them time to prepare. You have to be prepared. You can't be prepared. You can't say you need to be more organised. Or there's been a few occasions where your tone's been not okay. They're going to want details. Tell me when what time that phone call was, who I was speaking to and why it wasn't. And they are going to want that level of detail. So you can't go into those conversations making broad brush statements.
Be specific.
Yeah.
And potentially you will need to get a response if you've got questions as to why or what do you need or how can we assist you, what the performance plan is. You're going to need them time to go away and think about it.
Yeah.
They're not a person that's going to be comfortable just to be able to answer something straight away. They need to digest it.
Yeah.
And then if we've got our expressive personality, the trick I find when dealing with an expressive in a performance management is to try and get them to say the words themselves, because they're not good at listening, they're good at hearing. So it's very much about talk me through what you did in this situation, or give me some reasons why this, or what is your understanding of the policy, or getting them to say it rather than telling them, because they're not good listeners.
Yeah.
And they're far more likely to take ownership of and understand what the issue is if they've articulated it and talked it through themselves.
Absolutely. And look, I think that the basic framework that we always work off, doesn't matter which behavioural preset you are and who your audience might be, is the structure in terms of being able to have a difficult conversation. As I say to most of my clients, there is power in vulnerability. You know, acknowledge straight up that this is a difficult conversation. It is challenging, and we appreciate that it could be emotional, and this is a safe environment for you to express those emotions within reason, so that you start to try and eliminate or diminish that power responsibility, like I'm here talking to you and you'll listen. Call it for what it is. So being very open and transparent about what your topic of conversation is going to be beforehand. Don't railroad people into conversations they're not ready for. Be really open and honest about what you're there, and acknowledge the fact that it is difficult and step through it one by one.
Absolutely. I just wanted to do that as a foundation, and like we've done social styles in 15 minutes, which is not very long. As Dee said before, we do run workshops on this and can really help you understand your social style and also your teams and different strategies to deal with teams, because we're dealing with people. It's, what do we say? It's a contact sport.
Oh, absolutely. And people, my observations of people is we're becoming even more complex. And like I say, there's some heightened pressures on families and individuals at this point in time. And when you talk about cost of living, and you talk about uncertainty in the economy, and you talk about people having to navigate, whilst as employers, we'd love to be able to say, just there's the front door, leave your baggage there, come in, do the job that you paid for and leave. Those days are gone. It's just not how
it's not work. It's
not
complex than that.
So we need to be aware that there's a lot of stuff that is putting pressure on people, which is going to heighten their responses. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to have those honest conversations at a timely manner, in a timely manner, and structured with the best possible outcome.
Yeah, you want to be strategic and think, what is the outcome that I want to get from this? And if a conversation doesn't go as well as you wanted it to be, it is important to unpack that and not just put blame on the person for that, but think about, how did I deliver that? How could I have done it better so that we actually achieve the outcome that I was looking for, or that I thought was reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go into some questions.
Yes.
I have a new staff member starting and they aren't meeting the productivity requirements of the role. I shouldn't say that too loud, because we've had a new staff member working and she's just next door. And this is not a real life situation, because she's been really productive.
Yeah.
But what do I do to address this with them? So they're just new. I don't want to put them all.
Yeah, look, again, I would be having different types of conversations. First of all, I'd be asking myself, does this person actually know what I'm expecting them to do?
Clarity of expectation.
Yep, clarity of expectation. By being able to straight off the bat say, okay, to myself, am I at the point of just wanting to raise this with the employee, keep them on track, or am I at the point of going, yeah, no, this is just not going to work? Be honest with what kind of conversation that you need to have, and structure it, set it up appropriately. If it is they're not meeting the productivity, I would be having, and I'm not looking at terminating their employment, saying, okay, they're new, let's give them that breathing room. I would be having conversations in and around, again, the clarity for them. So have I given them the clarity first up? Yes or no? If I haven't, then that's my first point. I need to give it to them. I'd be having gentle conversations in and around, this is what I'm observing. This is what I'm seeing. This is where I think that we have some either areas to improve or gaps to address. Let's work out a plan of how to do that.
Yeah, I think that when people first start, I'm a big fan of directive and micromanaging. So they are high motivation but low skill set. So they really need to be, and you can say that from the start, we're going to be doing micromanaging to start. So what needs to be done, how to prioritize, what the time frame is, give them feedback. Because if you do that intensively at the start and get them to where they want to be, then you can back off. What I see often is that people allow poor behavioural performance and they're like, oh, they just started or they're just new, so they let it go. But they haven't let the employee know that it wasn't up to standards. Then they think it's acceptable, and then the employee gets frustrated down the track because it still hasn't changed. And the employee's like, I thought it was okay.
Nobody's a mind reader.
Yeah, exactly. So even though it's very obvious to you, it's very clear to you, you may have even said it to them, but remember they're getting a lot of information when they first start. You may have to say it several times in several different ways, or get someone else to say it to make sure it's really clear as to what's expected, but jump on early.
Absolutely.
Early. And if they're not the right fit, we've given them a time to change. Much better to have that hard conversation early on rather than later, longer it goes.
Absolutely.
More challenging it could be.
Yeah.
What should your policy say around performance management in your handbook or standalone policy?
Well, that is a big question.
What shouldn't it say?
It shouldn't have. Gone are the days where you should be saying, okay, you've got first warning, second warning, third warning, termination. That's too restrictive. So in terms of your are you talking performance management, or are you talking disciplinary, or both? Both. Your performance management should outline, obviously, where the organisation will consider going into a performance management process, which is a preliminary to a disciplinary process, and how the two interact. So if your first port of call in addressing performance is performance management, so a PIP, performance improvement plan, and that's in the policy, then you're locked into that. So my advice is really to keep the policies as vague as possible, to avoid having you to be locked into a specific process, and then avoid you being challenged because you're in breach of your own policy.
So a good example of this is if you have got, you say that everyone's going to get a PIP and 3 warnings, and it's quite like it's spelled out what the process should be, and you have a staff member who swears at a customer, or swears so customers can overhear even, you might say, I can't have someone swear at a customer 1, 2, 3 times before I can do a termination. That is detrimental. So it's got to be fit for the circumstances as to what it is. Now, swearing is not, what am I saying, worst case, instant dismissal, kind of material.
It depends on the context.
It does depend on it, but it's still not something that you necessarily do.
It's not theft, assault, fraud, or sexual harassment.
Exactly. But I'm not, and also depends upon the business and who's around, but don't lock yourself in is probably what we would say. You need to have something in there, but you need to have wiggle room so that you can go straight to a show cause, or you can give several warnings, or whatever it's going to be.
And if your policy does have an element of performance improvement and disciplinary action, so performance improvement being your plan, this is how you need to succeed in the role. If you don't succeed in the role, then we may look at termination, versus disciplinary. This is a written warning, do it again, and you might face termination. You need to have a link of what happens if your performance improvement plan is not successful.
Yeah.
So you need to tell people in your policy what happens if the PIP is not successful.
Yeah.
What happens? Where does it go?
But not every disciplinary process will have a PIP.
No.
You don't have to do a PIP with it. It's just an added addition, we would say, or we would recommend. Do you document verbal ones?
You have to ask yourself what the purpose is. If it's a verbal warning, then there is really no such thing as a verbal warning. There's counselling, and there's bringing the employee on the journey with you that you're not planning to take disciplinary action on. But I wouldn't even say that.
No, they're not. They're still being talked about a lot. I think there needs to be some sort of written documentation that you've had a conversation.
Yeah.
So that could just be some sort of file notes, or it could be an email to the person just to say, thanks for your conversation. As discussed, these are a few of the areas that we talked about. So it's not really a written warning, but it's a documentation that a verbal conversation took place where we discussed XYZ.
Yeah. And look, I've confirmed verbal warnings by using documentation in terms of it's just a caution. Is that That's a terminology that we're trying to get a midway point between hey, you need to take it seriously, even though it was verbal, etc. But it's not a written warning. It's not
We
worded.
don't want to have to go through the support person and setting it all up.
Yeah.
It's just an ad hoc, but I want it documented.
Yeah.
In case they have to rely on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, email or text. Thanks for coming today. Really pleased we talked. As discussed, these are 3 things that are really important. Or just something in there. So it's proof. Yeah, it's hard to proof. Yeah. When do you offer a support person talking of support, and what's the support person role?
The support person's role is designed to provide emotional support to the person who's undergoing a disciplinary process. Okay, so a disciplinary process can be a performance improvement plan, a written warning, termination, investigation, redundancy, all of those things. They're all disciplinary type processes. The legislation of the Fair Work Act says the employer must provide the opportunity for the employee to have a support person for any disciplinary process or any disciplinary.
So they use the word disciplinary.
Yeah, last I checked it. Now you make me second.
No, that's okay. Bad news.
That includes casuals. Like casuals are not exempt from it. I asked the question the other day, do I need to have a support person for a casual employee who's been here 3 weeks and they're just not great at their job? I'm like, yeah, you do.
Potentially, so that is a situation where if they go for an unfair dismissal or for where it may be or general protections, it's like the reason you're terminating them is fine, but you haven't followed process, and the CD get caught out and potentially will have to pay your way out of it. So close that loop.
And what we are seeing is general protections. People are proceeding more down the general protections path, mainly because probably it's uncapped compensation, whereas your unfair dismissal
is harder to get through.
No, I would disagree with that. It's harder to get through a hearing.
The onus of proof is on the employee to be able to do, at hearing,
So we tell clients you're not in right mind.
If you're going to go to a hearing.
Like if you're going to settle a general protections claim for say 6 weeks wages, and I get that's a lot, I'm not saying that it's not, versus what it's going to cost you to prep to go to hearing. That just is not a good commercial exercise. At hearing, yes, harder to get through, but 98% of claims are resolved at conference.
Yeah. So we just made that step up, but it sounds pretty good. Probably be close.
It's 100% of mine. Like we
very rarely
go hearing because it just does not make any commercial sense.
It's a lot of pressure on you to resolve before it goes to hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And people make up reasons.
Yeah.
Like to be able to lodge a general protections claim, they can. Some of the reasons for lodging protections claims that I've said, I just sit back and go, I could make a movie.
But yeah, offering a support person is important.
Intervene.
Actually, can they intervene, and can you say no? I don't want that support person. Well, would you have that support person?
You can, but there has to be a viable reason. So, is there a conflict of interest?
A lawyer.
Depends on if they are acting as support person.
So you can't have the support person can't advocate
unless they're a union representative.
Oh, union representative can advocate
because they're an industrial body.
Oh.
Yeah. So your general support person of friends and family, example, you can say to an employee if there's a conflict of interest. So let's just say
they want their supervisor.
They want their supervisor, or they want their subordinate employee potentially there, where you just think, okay, that person's really not going to be able to offer you independent support, and that person is probably going to have access to information that you typically don't want. You know.
This is, I said we'd do questions at the end, but this is probably appropriate. For funding end of contract for an employee, do we need to offer a support person to sit on to the meeting where we're advising the position is now redundant?
Yes. It's ending of employment. Ending of employment is a disciplinary process. Yeah,
but I would say that I don't think that if I've got a contract that's like a 6-month contract that comes to an end, I wouldn't say that's a redundancy. I'd just say that's the end of the contract.
Yep, but the conversation, you're in your best, I would say yes.
To start.
Yeah, and I would be saying straight off the bat, this conversation is in around the end of your contract, which we need to have a conversation with you. You're able to bring a support person with you if you wish.
Yeah.
There's just, I just wouldn't take the risk.
Just be able to do it. Yeah. Okay. How much notice is required when you're having a performance management meeting?
Are you talking performance management or are you talking disciplinary?
I have to change them.
Well, if you're doing performance improvement, that you should have pre-scheduled meetings.
Yeah.
Like when you set it up, we will have 2 weeks.
I think we're
for
talking more disciplinary.
disciplinary.
Yeah.
Look, we always say minimum of 24 hours. However, if somebody said, look, I can't get my support person here, can I do it on the next day? That's not unreasonable. If they say, oh, I can't get a support person, I can do it in 2 weeks. No,
What if it's a union rep?
the union rep can attend by phone, they can attend by Zoom, they can attend by a person.
But
That's
they can't
fine.
push it. I've seen that happen a few times with unions that have tried to push it.
Anything up to about 48 hours is reasonable.
What if you ask me and I say, can we just do it now?
Yeah, this happens quite readily. And look, if you were having that conversation with me, I'd be like, I'm not waiting 24 hours to hear what you have to say. Do it now. I would be then reciprocating that conversation to say the reason why we've scheduled it for tomorrow is to provide you the opportunity to have a support person. Are you foregoing your opportunity to have a support person?
Yeah.
If that person says yes, hopefully there's a witness around to do that. Otherwise, get them to confirm it on a scrap piece of paper. You know, that they're offered a support person, just need you to sign this. You're offered a support person, you've declined it, handwrite
Yeah,
it,
straight away.
don't need to have it typed, it's not predetermined. This is purely by the employee's actions. I'm just going to scribble it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, you always try and avoid giving people notice of a performance merit, a disciplinary on a Friday too, don't you?
I still think that whilst we have to have difficult conversations, there's a humane way to do it. And I look at it from the perspective, would I want to be sitting there all weekend stewing about a meeting that's going to happen on Monday? No, I wouldn't. I think that I'm likely to become much more angry, much more combative, and come at you all guns blazing, because I'd be ready. I'd be ready to shoot you down.
I do think it's this is where you probably would think of the person. If it was an analytical person, they might prefer that because they'd want the weekend to prepare and get themselves organised. So it may be appropriate in that scenario. So again, you just have to read the situation. But if you've got an amiable person, you know this is going to stress them out. Yeah, it may not be it's not necessarily going to be the best thing to get a positive outcome.
And look, I say to clients all the time, let's be honest and real about what this conversation is so that we can bring people into the conversation in the best mindset possible. If we're not at termination, say it.
Yeah.
This is not a termination meeting. This is not about the termination of your employment, but there are areas of your performance, conduct or capacity that we need to address now so we don't end up. We're taking the wind out of the sails and the fear and the anxiety and everything else.
Point, actually. Yeah.
Way before you even get there.
Yeah. Which does bring into what information do I need to provide them before the meeting, and should this be in writing?
The notification of a meeting, in my opinion, should always be verbal. We need to humanise it. All right. And if you send me a text or an email, I'm just going to turn around and say, didn't get it. Because
you're a difficult staff member, aren't you? Yeah.
So have it verbally. You need to humanise it, and you need to I would always confirm the meeting via email or by text. Further to our conversation, confirm that you're required to attend a meeting. I would always reiterate what it's about. I don't think you should ever invite a person to a meeting and not give them a heads up about what it is that you talk to them about, because you're just railroading them. And if they feel blindsided, depending on who you're talking with, they will come out all guns blazing, or you'll have a work cover claim the next day.
Yeah, I think there's only is there some case law around that too, being able to provide information to people before the meeting so that they can come prepared, or at least have a heads up as to what the meeting's going to be about. I think that's really important.
Yeah,
I think too.
That confirmation text or email serves 2 purposes, because you're also saying in there, as discussed, you're able to bring a support person. Then you've got your evidence to say that you did make it available.
Yeah, I think you have to think about what outcome you're wanting from the meeting. So if you genuinely want to get the relationship back on track and change the behaviour with it, I'm not going to go out too hard and too formal and too scary with it, because they're going to be thinking about their exit strategy.
Yeah.
Language is going to be softer. It's going to be great to have a chat, an opportunity for us to better understand how we can support you. These are some things that we'd like to discuss. So you're a lot warmer with it. If this is a person that I'm like, I'm going to resign, this is like the start to the end, I'm going to be far more formal and direct in that. So yeah, think about the language as to what outcome you're going for as to which approach you're going to take and giving that. The nuance of the letter, and even whether it's a letter or it's an email or it's a text, obviously the more formal, if it's delivered by
and
personally delivered.
Well, it goes back to that messaging of bring people into the conversation in the best possible mindset. So if you need to talk to them about an interaction that they had with a customer, tell them that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be going, if you're telling them what you're talking about I'm not going into all details, it's highly bullet point potentially. So we would like to talk about your attendance or your work on this account or your productivity, whatever it is, but don't go into too much detail.
Unless you're going down even at that stage when you go.
Yeah.
Really disciplined process, but I think that's past the point of having a difficult conversation.
Yeah, that's when you're really into that.
Yeah,
the pointy end of
the end of
conversation.
line.
Yeah, if someone's in their qualifying period, which is going to be 12 months for less than 15 staff and 6 months for other staff, do I still need to go through this process?
You still need to have a process. You still need to be able to demonstrate that you told the employee that they could have a support person for the termination of their employment. I use terminology along the lines of we need to have a conversation with you about your ongoing employment with the organisation. And then at that meeting, they can bring a support person. Yep, all good. I give them the reasons. Like gone are the days when you can afford to terminate somebody on probation or qualifying without a reason. The reason doesn't have to be.
It can be vague.
It can be vague.
High level.
It can be high level. But if it's in terms of their ability to generate chargeable hours, or it's their ability to form a connection with the clients, or
align with company values.
Yeah, but I give them some details because what we are seeing is that employees are taking that, oh, you're on probation, so we're terminating your employment. They're taking that, they're putting one and one together and coming up with 5,000 and lodging a general protections claim.
Yeah.
Because they then mount their own reasons for why they would.
General protections is the 6 and 12 months not applicable in a general protections. The 6 and 12 months is only applicable for unfair dismissal jurisdiction with it. And it's the same if it's casual as well.
Casual employees can lodge a general protections claim. A prospective employee that you've interviewed can lodge a general protections claim, but that's a whole lot.
Yeah, we used to be, it's just casual, just stop rostering them all. I don't use them. I just tell them they're not needed. Yeah, and look, unless
had a casual who's been there 5 years and been working 38, 40 hours, week in, week out, you lost the ability to say that they're casual.
I had a reasonable expectation that there was going to be some sort of continuity of work, then I think you have to go in and have the meeting properly. If it is a casual that you use like once every 6 months, just for a function or occasionally, and maybe not. But if it's someone who's got a reasonable expectation, shift days might change, length of shift might change, but there is going to be some sort of ongoing work, and you're not going to use them anymore, then I do think that you're much better to tighten the process. Just dot your I's and cross your toes.
Absolutely. Cross your toes.
Cross your toes and your fingers.
I'm fine crossing my toes. If I can do that, I'm probably going to join the circus.
Can I write up the warning and have it ready to give them in the meeting?
No.
Yeah, we get this all the time still, don't we?
Yeah.
I've written it up and I'm issuing them with the warning.
Yeah, because your whole purpose of discussing, there's the elements of the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness and being compliant with the Fair Work legislation. So if you've got a difficult conversation that you need to have with your employees, you need to keep in mind they have a right under the principles of natural justice to know what the issue is. They have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to representation, and that's that support person, and they have the right to unbiased treatment. So they are all of the founding principles. So when we look at was a termination or was a disciplinary action or something procedurally fair, were they told? Were they given the opportunity to and respond? Did they have the right to representation? Did they have the right to unbiased treatment? So you need to talk to them about it. You need to give them the opportunity to respond. If you've got a letter already prepared, you're basically saying, doesn't matter, say, we've already decided.
Yeah.
Right? And that's procedurally unfair.
Yeah. It's really important. You can have written up for yourself some bullet points of things that you want to go through, things that you want to discuss, but you would never ever have that warning written up until you have to finish the meeting and then fill in the gaps as to what.
Don't send it 15 minutes after the meeting.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I would tend to, when I have that, send them the correspondence to it, I would tend to include their point of view or the things they bring up, even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah, I put in
Yeah.
to say, yeah, this is what we raised with you, this was what your response was.
Yeah.
This is our decision, these are the consequences.
Yes. On the balance of justice, this is what we've decided. With balance of probability, rather, this is what we've decided.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just because you're actually putting in what they're saying doesn't mean that you agree with it. You're just acknowledging the fact that they brought up these issues. You can't introduce new information in that warning letter too, because it's a record of the comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't go away and think, I should have said this, so I'm going to put it all into the letter.
No, that's not okay.
That's not okay. What happens if they refuse to sign it?
I get this one a lot. Okay.
I would tend to say, is there any specific area that you disagree that we discussed, that we have included or not included, that you would like to add, or is there any further information that you would like to have put with this as well, given that opportunity? But if they don't want to sign or they don't agree, then yeah, that's all fine. It's like people that won't sign their employment contracts.
But they'll accept pay
They'll
the
get
person
paid
into the
every
day each week, yeah. So the implied intent is there.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Wouldn't get too worried about it, but
No.
do give them the opportunity if they disagree.
Seek to understand why.
Yeah.
Is it because I don't believe I should be given a formal warning? Okay, we understand that you may not agree with our decision-making capacity, but this is the decision that we have made based on the information that's available.
And don't be too pig-headed in the meeting not to change your point of view. Like you might go on guns blazing and think, you know, this person has done the wrong thing, but when you actually hear all of the information, their version, you may need to.
You may change you.
Yeah, you may change too.
And that's that, again, principles of natural justice, unbiased treatment. So if you go in there and you've already made your mind up, you've got to ask yourself, am I actually giving this person a reasonable opportunity to have a decision made without sort of bias?
Yeah. What happens if, as part of the performance management plan, disciplinary, I say they'll be provided with extra training, but we don't do it because we're busy, and an incident occurs, and now I want to progress to another warning termination. So basically, as part of that, there was some sort of PIP, performance improvement plan, where I said I will give you training or extra support. I don't do it as the employer. You're still not.
I would say problem belong on you.
Yes.
Because you've made a commitment. It'd be the first thing that the employee would use against you. You never gave me the training, so how can I expect to be any different if you never said what you're going to do? Whether we like it or not, we get into these situations where the employer has to make difficult decisions and execute difficult conversations, the employer is always going to be held to a higher standard and a higher level of accountability than the employee ever will.
Oh, look, the thing is, we will always say, yes, we can. Because of course you can give them another warning or you can terminate them, but obviously your risk around this is increased. So if they do go to Fair Work or put a claim in, that is going to be a vulnerability or something that they're going to unpick for you.
Yeah. What I tend to do is I try to actually say to people, put the onus of the sourcing the training back on the employee. Bit covert.
I like that.
To say, look, you need to go and source training in this area. So let's say anger management. I'm sure you say that I could build anger management training all the time. A training program that you're comfortable with. These are the boundaries. So it needs to either be within this sort of, this is how much money we've got, or this is how much time we've got. This is what we need completed by. So you go and source it, come back to me.
Yeah, or you need to go make a time for mentoring and training with the person. That's actually quite a clever way to do it because then the onus does belong to the person.
Yeah, but I usually put that into any of the documentation, whether that
so it's really clear.
Written warnings or PIP processes include that level of context.
Yeah. Can I be accused of, we've just got a couple more questions and then we'll finish up or answer any questions if people have got questions you'd like to put in. Can I be accused of bullying or causing psychosocial stress by going through performance management?
Yes.
But that's not fair.
But people ask me all the time, can I do this? And I go, yes, you can do whatever. Doesn't mean there's not going to be a consequence. So can an employee say that they're being bullied or happens all the time?
And do they go to a doctor who will then give them a week of a certificate for stress leave? Potentially. Would we challenge it? Yes.
Yes. And I think as soon as we let go of the fact, and I have this conversation with my eldest son, bless his cotton socks, He's, oh, they can't just sack me. And I'll go, yeah, they can walk in and they can say, mate, get your bag, you are out. Doesn't make it right, but they can. So I think as employees, we really need to be mindful of the fact that letting go of, can I do something? Because the answer is yes, you can. Should I, is the question you should be asking.
Yeah, don't be afraid of bullying complaints or stress complaints. Yes, they can do them, they can put it through. You just have to hang on heart, be able to be honest and truthful through the process, through responding if you've done the right thing. If you haven't, there may be some recommendations for improvement, but it's not really hanging. Unless you've been outright bullied, completely done the wrong thing, it's not really a hanging offence, is it?
No.
It's just it's something that we as employees are too scared of, I think.
Yeah, or we see employees go the other way.
Yeah.
That they then start to fight with ego or fight because they feel somebody has said something. Just because somebody has said something doesn't make it true. And if you take the bait and you get into that, no one's going to win.
Yeah,
no one.
I agree.
So you got to be the bigger person and step back and go, okay, look, this person is reacting from a place of heightened emotion. Their life's been turned upside down, or they're feeling very conflicted. They're feeling confronted. So they're not coming at the situation from themselves.
Yeah. Can I recommend to the staff member that they hand in their termination of employment rather than go through a performance disciplinary process? And I'm telling them that. So that their record, I'm saying that your employment record won't reflect that you've been fired if you just hand in your termination now.
In that, no, you can't do it in that process.
No.
What you can do is potentially engage in what we call without prejudice conversation, where it has to be set up correctly. And again, maybe that's a whole other
It's a whole other conversation.
Without prejudice conversation. But essentially what you're trying to do is set up a caveat over the conversation where we can speak very openly and honestly and as adults about where we're at and about where you're at. And through that process, we can say
negotiate.
Well, negotiate, or we can say, look, this is where we're at. We have these concerns. We can address these in several different ways, but we really have to ask the question, do you have the resilience to do that? Do you have the endurance to be able to do that? Do you actually still want to be here? Because let's make this, we can make it humane.
And that's without prejudice. That's not what I was getting to actually, but very good point. Those without prejudice conversations are something that we do a lot. And I recommend you get a bit of assistance before entering that and potentially use a third party.
Yeah, independence.
And independence is really important when we're doing that. With this situation, what I'm talking about is when you're coercing someone and then you go, oh, but they resigned, and it's they resigned because you didn't force them to. Right? That is still an unfair termination.
That is what we call coercive dismissal.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they lose it and they just say, I resign, and then they go away and they come back 24 hours later and say, oh no, I didn't mean it. There needs to be a reasonable cooling down period. You can't say, no, too late, you said it, it's gone, you're gone now.
Yeah.
I think that it could be seen as being harsh and unreasonable, which won't reflect well if they put in an unfair dismissal. So yeah, I'm happy to accept your resignation, but take the next 24 hours to really have a think about if that's what you do want to do. Otherwise, more than happy to recommence these conversations.
Yeah.
It's important.
And I think sometimes the without prejudice conversations are underutilized because they're, again, thinking about the person who's in front of you and what type of behavioural preset or personality profile they have, giving them a degree of control over what happens can be a really powerful thing, particularly if there's going to be some sort of negotiated exit. We can make this an agreeable termination, an amicable termination because it hasn't worked for whatever reason. Yeah, I think they're underutilized.
I'm just picking up 2 more questions, then I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to go to, so please pop those in there if anyone hasn't put one in. If someone goes on sick leave or stress leave through the process, can I just terminate them?
Yes.
You can, but should you?
No. Look, and there's 2 parts of the legislation that sort of offer protection. If an employee is on an approved work cover claim, it's an adverse action for you to terminate an employee whilst they're incapacitated for work. And so you've got, they're incapacitated for work, it's also unlawful to terminate somebody because of the work cover injury for a period of 12 months. So there's lots of little tricky fiddly bits with the legislation that just basically say, open your checkbook if you're going to do.
Yes, absolutely. We laugh when we say it, but we get it all the time that people are just wanting to terminate.
We have terminology for that. we say, yes, you can punch and pay,
yeah.
because it will cost you.
It will cost you that. And the final one that I've got is, what are the potential penalties for a business for unfair dismissal, not doing performance management properly?
If the claim is lodged in the unfair dismissal jurisdiction and it goes to hearing, right, the maximum compensation is 26 weeks. That's just
6 months.
6 months wages plus your legal fees and time and effort and headaches and.
So when people say,
Value.
I'll do a settlement and you have to pay me 12 months, yeah.
General protections, it's a possibility.
Yeah, generally it's not capped.
Yeah, general protections is uncapped compensation, unfair dismissals is capped. But like I said, most unfair dismissal claims and general protections claims are resolved at conference, and they're usually resolved and look, this is not gospel, I don't want anybody to say DZ, in and around that sort of 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the situation.
Yeah. Now, I do have a question as to if we're going to have a recording. So yes, we will have a recording of this and we'll send it out to people. So please and share it around if anyone else would like to see it. The other question I've got is the best manner to deal with toxic employees that affect culture around the workplace. That's not a 5-minute answer with it, but I do think it really does go back to management and clarity around values, workplace culture, expectation.
Consistency of application.
Yeah. Look, we will often, and it will depend upon the circumstances, but often what we will do to deal with this is that we'll do a staff survey. So we've consolidated what the actual issues are, feedback that back to the staff and say, this is what you've recognised as the issues. Often it's like not holding poor performers accountable, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's often some sort of workshop that we would do around above the line, below the line behaviour, what our expectations are from the workplace, what a high performing workplace looks like. So we'll really start to dig into that.
Yeah. Give the employees a degree of ownership over developing what that culture is and explaining what the tangibles are. Quite often we see, what do we want our culture to be? Oh, respectful.
What does that
mean?
Yeah.
What does it actually look like in terms of behaviour?
And what does disrespect look like?
Yes.
And then the next stage, once you've done that workshop, is to do one-on-one. It could be performance reviews, but it could also be performance management or disciplinary. You know, we went through this, we discussed the gossiping or withholding information, or you're breaching this and you're starting to really hold the accountability. And sometimes you just have to be tough sometimes, and sometimes there has to be a bit of blood. Sometimes you have to go through a process or potentially a termination to be able to move forward, or for people to understand that you're serious about improving the workplace culture.
As I say, with most conversations, difficult, whether or not it be disciplinary, restructure, redundancy, termination, toxic employees, culture, etc. You have to rip the Band-Aid off and you have to let the wound bleed before it's going to heal. There is going to be pain.
It's a gory analogy there.
But it's true. If you think about talking about toxic culture, sometimes you have got to have those really hard conversations, or you've got to have that really hard consequence to rip the Band-Aid off. And there'll be blood and there'll be upset feelings, etc. But then in time, it will start to heal.
You have to call people on their behaviour too sometimes, I think. Like that.
And consistently, because as soon as you have inconsistency, I was dealing with a client, bless their cotton socks. Same sort of similar question. Our employees, they're doing these behaviours which we don't like. But when at the core of it, one of the directors is doing the same behaviour. So it's like you can't make an allowance, even though they are the directors, their name on the front of the building. Yep, but you can't.
You're not talking about business.
Yeah. You can't have your cake. It's got to be consistency, and there's got to be consistencies and consequences. Director's got a group of fishing buddies that they go fishing with on the weekend, or a manager or a supervisor, and they might just everybody else gets dragged over the coals. You know, there's no way you can have a healthy culture within a workplace if you've got that level of disparity and consistent treatment going on.
It needs to be transparency and fairness. So.
Yeah.
Look, thank you everyone for joining us today. For those on our ongoing packages, we do webinars every month where we do Q&As. They tend to be shorter, about half an hour.
Next one's on the 3rd of June.
Next one's 3rd of June. It's on workplace health and safety. We do a lot of Q&As with it. And yes. I'm not going to be here. If you are really interested in attending these and getting your staff and senior staff to attend these types of webinar training sessions, I hope they're helpful, then please send me an email or just give
What
us a
you wanna
call.
hear.
Yeah, and
The cows come around, as you can tell. If you give us a topic to talk about, we will.
HR's fun. We love HR. On that note,
people.
thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.